This is Hidden Killers with Tony Brueski. Here now, Tony Brueski.
Let's talk Delphi. Let's start with the uncomfortable truth people pretend not to see. A guilty verdict does not sanitize the investigative dumpster fire that came before it. A conviction doesn't magically transform bad police work into good police work. It doesn't fix the blind spots, the shortcuts, the political pressure, and the flat-out confusion that defined the first 6 years of this case. And I think deep down, everyone who's actually read the documents, the real ones, not the press conference summaries, knows that. But in the Delphi murders, that truth gets buried under the emotional weight of two little girls, a grieving community, and a single, tidy narrative that the state desperately needed after a decade of being unable to tell the public a coherent story. Richard Allen is convicted, yes. He's serving 130 years, yes. The jury reached a decision, yes. But the investigative record, the transcripts, the depositions, internal memos, reconstruction files, exhibits, Frank's filings, tell a second story running underneath the official one. And that second story is the one nobody with a badge or in political office wants us to talk about, wants you to talk about, wants anyone to even know about, because it forces you to confront what the investigation actually looked like. Not what people later pretend it was on Dateline or in interviews with overly Botoxed reporters. The truth is this: the investigation was sloppy, fragmented, distracted, overwhelmed, under-led, over-politicized, and ultimately retrofitted to justify the arrests that came 6 years too late. If this is how the most important case in modern Indiana history was handled, with cameras pointed directly at the investigators and the world watching, imagine what happens in cases that don't get this kind of scrutiny. Oh, and they didn't want this scrutiny. They did everything in their power to keep cameras, reporters, the general public, anyone with an opinion that didn't go quite along with exactly what they said it was, out. Out of the courtroom, out of the proceedings, out of discovery, out of what the jury's going to hear, out of anything and everything. Basically, we're going to use pressure to shut you up and shut you out because we don't want to hear it, because you know what? What you're saying makes us look really bad, and the evidence you have is fucking solid. It supports it. It supports that our story is bullshit and that we just locked away a man for 130 years over pretty much nothing and ignored or helped cover up, depending on how you look at it, such solid leads that almost any other investigation prays for. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's walk through how this thing actually fell apart behind the scenes. And I'd love to get your thoughts in the comments section on YouTube. The first 48 hours of any homicide investigation are crucial, and Delphi was no exception. But when you look at the actual documents, the dispatch logs, the early interviews, the follow-up notes, the backfilled summaries, the inconsistencies in who was doing what, you don't see the machinery of a highly coordinated response. You see chaos. You see dozens of leads surface one day, and day two, only for most of them to disappear into a void. Or taped over, as they did in Delphi on their DVD player. Oh, we taped over all those critical interviews in the first few days. Nothing to see here. You see witness statements not cross-referenced until years later. You see officers stepping on each other's toes because there was no unified strategic plan in place, despite their name, Unified Command. You see a pattern again and again. A witness reports something significant, an officer writes it down, and then radio silence. No recorded follow-up, no documented dismissal, no official statement. Clearing the lead, it just evaporates. That's not good investigative work. That's a sign that everyone was drowning and nobody wanted to admit they were underwater. And the years that followed didn't get tighter or clearer. They got foggier. Every 12 months, the tone shifted. 1 year, investigators were confident the killer was local. The next, they were chasing online predators. Then suddenly, the sketches changed. One suspect became a different suspect, then a younger suspect. Then maybe the two sketches were the same person at different ages or angles or not. Or maybe there were multiple people, or maybe the sketches didn't matter at all. Depends on the month. You think I'm exaggerating. You think the case could not be this convoluted. Every fucking word of what I just said is true and happened. And through all of this, there were periods, long periods, where nothing was happening. The public heard nothing. Investigators documented almost nothing. Leads weren't followed. Tips weren't checked. Digital evidence sat dormant because it didn't point cleanly in one direction. This wasn't the slow, careful, chess-like work of patient detectives. It was institutional paralysis. Pick up a file, put it down, spend a year chasing a dead end, pivot to the next dead end, repeat until the case turns 6 years old, and then make some shit up, basically. So how do you break a stalemate like that? You find the magical piece of evidence. Or as I said, you make shit up. You find the thing you can build a story around. And in the Delphi case, that piece of evidence became the bullet. Now, let's not sugarcoat this. Relying on a toolmark analysis to tie one unspent round and a crime that didn't involve a gun to one specific gun is dicey in the best circumstances. Toolmark evidence is disputed, subjective, and has been trashed in courtrooms across the country for being far less reliable than its defenders claim. But in Delphi, this single bullet, which sat in evidence for years without becoming the center of the investigation, suddenly became the gravitational pull that reshaped everything else. Before Richard Allen, the bullet was just another piece of physical evidence with no clear target. After Richard Allen, it became the answer, the missing link, the bridge between a crime scene and the man who had been hiding in plain sight for years. But the timing matters. The chain of reasoning matters. The fact that this round didn't rise to significance until investigators decided they need to release old evidence matters. It tells you the case wasn't built from the ground up. It was built backwards. Start with the man. Then elevate the evidence that supports him. Then dim the lights on anything that doesn't. And that's exactly what happened to the evidence that didn't point to Allen. Not just the Odinist material the defense made famous, but all the early indicators that the scene might have involved more than one individual, or at least someone whose behavior and ideology fit a pattern that had nothing to do with a middle-aged CVS worker. The defense's Odinist findings were dramatic. And let's be honest here. This wasn't just the defense's Odinist findings. The defense didn't find them. The FBI did and brought them to investigators, to which investigators said, "You're fired." Huh? Yes. They fired the FBI. Well, at least one of the investigators said they did. The other one says they have no idea what happened. Yeah, cohesive investigation. One hand knowing what the other is doing in the same department. The FBI was fired? No, I didn't fire the FBI. The FBI bringeth information that you, for whatever reason, don't want to dig into, follow up on. Maybe it touches too close to home. Maybe there's some people involved in this in law enforcement. Maybe there's some people that are higher up than law enforcement that don't want anybody to know about Odinist ties. For whatever reason, that was a hot potato nobody wanted to touch. It's the kind of thing that grabs headlines. But buried inside all of that noise were questions investigators should have asked themselves before. Why were certain scene details dismissed as meaningless when the FBI experts and scholars in colleges who study this stuff said, no, there's something to this? Why were ideological clues pointed out by some investigators and then downplayed by the Keystone cops? It's like you get to a level of thinking, a level of understanding, a level of investigative work that just, frankly, the Delphi cops don't have because they're in fucking Delphi. Thank God they don't have that sort of knowledge or experience in this small of a town. And others do. And others bring this to them. And they're like, well. Why did local individuals with violent rhetoric, extremist ideology, and proximity to the area receive inconsistent levels of scrutiny? Why were certain symbolic or stage elements at the scene not integrated into any official theory of the crime? You don't have to think a cult did it. You don't have to buy the Odinist angle at all. You just have to ask why law enforcement wasn't consistent with its own follow-through. Why key leads were never tied off in writing. Why some investigators saw meaning in the scene and others waved it off. And why, after years of internal contradiction, the official line suddenly became that everything pointed to one man acting alone. Look at the social media leads. Look at the behavioral analysis notes. Look at the interviews that reference multiple individuals who expressed hostility, made violent statements online, or had ideological obsessions consistent with ritualistic violence. Some investigators took those things seriously. Others dismissed them outright. There was no unified approach. That's the red flag, not the theory itself, the inconsistency. That's how you know you're not dealing with a disciplined investigative process. You're dealing with a fragmented one. But the part that really tells the story, the part that exposes how messy this investigation actually was, sits inside the official depositions. Because when you put law enforcement in the room, put them under oath, and force them to answer questions with no press conference, no script, no rehearsed talking points, you get the truth, or at least the truth about what they remember and what they don't. And what they don't remember is staggering. Page after page. I don't recall. I need to look at my notes. I'm not sure who was assigned to that. I thought someone else handled it. I wasn't aware of that lead. I wasn't part of that conversation. I don't know why that wasn't followed up with a real nice folksy tone to it. Makes you feel like, oh, they're genuine. These are nice guys. You go have a beer with them. Sure, you might be able to. But that doesn't mean they're qualified to investigate this case. And then right beside those memory gaps, you see something else, an almost laser-focused clarity when the topic shifts back to Richard Allen. Suddenly the details sharpen. The recollections become specific. The narrative becomes consistent, almost convenient. This is not how you want your investigative record to look. You don't want officers remembering selectively. You don't want contradictions on where evidence was found or who logged it. You don't want disagreements on whether parts of the scene look staged or symbolic. You don't want officers forgetting why potential suspects were dropped, especially when those suspects lived in the community and had connections investigators later tied to or tried to pretend were meaningless. You know, connections like one's talking about meeting one of the actual victims at the spot where they were murdered the day they were murdered. One where you have people literally reconstructing the crime scene on their Facebook page with Odinist imagery, also found on the bodies of the victims before anyone publicly knew about anything Odinist or ruin-wise or symbolic-wise. One where you actually have someone asking if they'd be in trouble if they hawked a loogie on one of the victims. Would I be in trouble if I spit on one of them? At the heart of all this is something no one likes admitting. Investigators are human. They get tired. They get overwhelmed. Some are just fucking idiots. They feel pressure from superiors, from community, from the media. They make leaps. They cling to the first thing that feels like momentum. They try to tell a story that makes sense, even if the messy reality underneath doesn't line up. In Delphi, all the pressure in the world converged on one case for 6 years, and instead of producing a clean, bulletproof investigation, it produced a file full of confusion, omissions, and hindsight rationalizations. There were moments, quiet, subtle moments, in the record where certain investigators clearly believed the case pointed away from a lone offender. There were internal disagreements about motive, staging, symbolism, and the significance of environmental clues. There were leads that, if developed fully, might have created uncomfortable political or social fallout. And instead of tackling those head on, the system restrained itself. It minimized, it avoided, it erased. This doesn't mean anyone wanted the wrong man. It means the system wanted a man, a suspect, an arrest, a conclusion. The families deserved answers, the town needed closure, and when Richard Allen finally surfaced, even in the smallest way, it gave investigators something to hold on to, a name, a face, a path forward. Never mind that he came forward literally in the days after the murders, raised his hand and said, "Hey, I was down there. How can I help?" You know, like murderers do. And then all those years later, "Oh, remember that guy that said he was down there? How can I help?" And then we fucked that up and never talked to him again and didn't ask any more questions and went on our merry way. And all those solid leads that actually do lead somewhere, well, one of them died. And the others, well, we're going to wait 3 years to arrest him on CSAM material, even though he admitted to having it, and we caught him with it. We'll give him 3 more years. Gee, what's going on there? Let's go after the CVS guy with literally the poster mere feet away from the counter he works at, with your suspect sketches of which look nothing like him. From there, everything else becomes gravity. The bullet, the admissions, the cell phone, the physical location, the timeline, the video. Each piece of evidence was filtered through the assumption that this was the guy, not through a neutral, disciplined evaluation of all possible suspects, though. Well, he's not saying he did it. What are we going to do? He's challenging us. He's saying over and over, "You're wrong. Let's lock him in a room, in a prison, for more than a year." Huh? Solitary confinement. Put him there. Make him go mad. He'll say anything. Which is exactly what happened. He started eating his own fecal matter, started running headfirst into walls, and then finally said he did it. He also killed his grandchildren that don't exist. That's what happens when you torture someone and break them down mentally. They'll admit to pretty much anything you want them to. And this is the type of admission that the Delphi investigators hang their hats on as great police work. Not a town you want to get stuck in. Not a town you want to have anything go wrong in and rely on actual police work of any sort of value that's going to help you or be accurate or play with reality. If they don't like you, they don't like you. And they hold power there. It's exactly why the investigative failures still matter today, even with a conviction, even with a sentence, even with the appearance of closure, because justice is not about closure, it's about correctness. And correctness requires a process that can withstand scrutiny, not just produce an answer. Abby and Libby deserved an investigation that was methodical, consistent, transparent, honest. They deserved investigators who didn't get swept into the inertia of a 6-year desperation spiral. They deserved a process where alternative suspects were examined thoroughly, documented clearly, and either ruled out decisively or pursued further. Instead, the record we're left with is full of cracks that don't change the verdict, but absolutely change the confidence people have in how that verdict was reached. If this is how law enforcement handles its most important cases in Delphi, what does it do when nobody's paying attention? What does it do when victims aren't national names? When the families don't have support? When the community isn't begging for answers? What corners get cut then? What evidence gets ignored then? What unconscious bias gets mistaken for investigative instinct then? These are not small questions. They're the entire foundation of the trust in the system. And the fear, the honest, quiet fear that people don't want to say out loud, is that the Delphi investigation wasn't an anomaly. It was a mirror. a reflection of how everyday cases are handled across the country when the pressure is high, the politics are heavy, and the need for resolution outweighs the need for precision. We can say Richard Allen is guilty. We can acknowledge the jury's decision. We can respect the judicial process, but we cannot pretend the investigation failed or did not fail. It did fail. It was not clean. We cannot pretend the ignored evidence doesn't matter. We cannot pretend the contradictions inside the depositions don't matter. We cannot pretend alternative leads didn't deserve better. Abby and Libby deserve the truth and all of it, not just the version that was convenient. And if we can't say that out loud, then what are we even doing? Give me your thoughts in the comments section on YouTube. If you're not already there, search for us. Search Hidden Killers with Tony Brueski, and that's where you will find us. Press subscribe if you're listening to us on the podcast platforms. Press subscribe if you're watching us on YouTube, please. We're trying to get to 100,000 subscribers on YouTube by the end of the year, so if you wouldn't mind, go over there and please hit subscribe. Help us try and get there. We are almost there with your help. Helps us continue to do this reporting for you every single day. Give us your thoughts in the comments. I'm Tony Brueski. We'll talk again.
Want more on this case and others? Then press subscribe now and don't miss a moment of true crime coverage from Tony Brueski and the Hidden Killers podcast.